With the installation and configuration process complete, we can start learning more about how to interact with MySQL. In order to carry out any task in conjunction with a MySQL database, you'll first need to connect to the server. Now, because for security reasons, MySQL doesn't just let anybody connect to the server, connections are accepted or denied based on verification of the provided access credentials. A fresh MySQL installation only includes one account, namely the root user account. This is an incredibly important account, so before I show you how to use it to make your first connection, I'd like to talk a bit more about the vital role played by the root user. The MySQL root account is essentially MySQL's super user or administrative account, capable of executing any conceivable task associated with your MySQL server, ranging from creating databases and users to shutting down the database entirely. So it's needless to say, you should not provide anybody with any information associated with this root account, such as the password. Second thing I want to point out regarding the root user is that the MySQL root user and your operating system root or administrative user are two entirely separate entities, each with their own password and their own respective capabilities. So even though they might share a common name, particularly as related to certain operating systems such as Linux, you should not confuse the two. Finally, you should always keep in mind that improper use of your MySQL root user account could result in your day being ruined. This user has the power, as I mentioned, to create and to destroy, and one false move could really cause irreparable damage to your database. So you're really going to want to tread lightly when using this account. Later in this video, I'm going to show you how to create restricted administrative or root users, which can be used to carry out administrative tasks associated with a specific database, while at the same time restricting these accounts in such a way that they could not cause widespread damage if used improperly. But for now, we're going to take a walk on the wild side and use the root user account to log in to the database for the first time. Okay, with all of the standard warnings and disclaimers regarding the root user account out of the way, let's log into the MySQL database. Although, as you will learn throughout the remainder of this video, there are actually quite a few ways you can log into a MySQL database. However, one of the easiest ways involves using the MySQL client. The MySQL client is a simple but powerful command line interface, which you'll access using your operating system's terminal window. Windows users can open their terminal window by navigating to the Start button and opening a command prompt by typing CMD and pressing Enter, as demonstrated here. If you are running Linux or OS X, then it's practically a certainty that you already know how to interact with a terminal window because it's a standard practice when using those operating systems, so I won't belabor the point any further. However, if you are on Windows, I would like to suggest downloading an alternative terminal window called Console 2. Console 2 is an open source terminal window which you can download and install from sourceforge.net. Now, I like Console 2 because it offers a number of features not available within the standard Windows terminal window, such as the ability to create multiple tabs, manage your font size a little more effectively, and additionally expand the window, something which is possible but not very easy to do with the standard terminal window. At any rate, you certainly don't have to download Console 2 right now to continue. All of the commands that I execute within the Console 2 window will work identically within the standard Windows terminal window. So with that aside, let's go ahead and log into the MySQL server. So I'm going to log in by executing the following command, typing MySQL followed by 3 arguments. So I've identified a -h localhost, -u root, and finally -p. So once pressing enter, you're going to be prompted to enter the root password, which you presumably changed during the MySQL server and configuration process. If at that time you left it blank, go ahead and just press enter now. Otherwise, enter the password as I am going to do and press enter. Congratulations, you are now logged into your MySQL server. Type quit in order to return to the operating system shell and press enter. So what exactly did we do to cause the MySQL server to grant us access? As I mentioned, we passed in 3 arguments to the MySQL command. The -h flag stands for host. We want to connect to a MySQL server in this particular example, which is installed locally. So I've specified localhost as the argument associated with the host flag. Next, I identify the user, passing along the -u flag, U standing for user, followed by the username, which in this case is root. And finally, I tell MySQL that I expect to supply a password associated with this account, and so pass the -p flag. However, you probably noticed that we haven't passed the password along on the command line, such as we did with localhost and root. The reason for that is because several common operating systems, notably OS X and the various versions of Linux and Unix, save command line histories. Therefore, if we were to provide the password here on the command line, it increases the possibility that somebody who gained access to the server could review the history logs and therefore find that password and use it to further compromise the server, including notably the MySQL database. So by just passing the -p flag, that's enough to tell MySQL that we are going to subsequently provide that password in a more secure fashion by basically masking the characters using asterisks instead of plain text. If you did not create a root user password during the installation process, or at some later point in the future want to change that root user password to something else, you can do so using the set password command. To set the root user password, you'll logically need to be logged in as the root user. Once logged in, you can change the password by executing the set password command. So let's start by logging in using the same credentials as demonstrated in the previous section. Once logged in, we can use the set password command, like so, to change the password for the root user. Equals password, and then here we will provide the desired new password. So I'll go ahead and execute that, and then log out, and make sure that everything's working properly by this time logging in using the new secret password. You are not limited to, of course, changing the root password account using the set password command. In fact, you can change anybody's password using the set password command. Later in the video, we'll talk at length about user accounts and how to properly manage them. A default MySQL installation includes several databases, including a number which are used for administrative purposes, 2 which contain sample data, and finally one named test, which is generally used as a place where new users can get acquainted with basic commands. To view a list of available databases, let's log back into the MySQL server using the same credentials as provided previously, providing our password, and finally, once logged in, you can execute the show databases command to view a list of all databases, which at this time include 6. Now, because show databases is the first command we've executed within the client, I'd like just to perhaps go on a tangent for a moment and talk a bit more about MySQL's behavior in regards to entering commands. First of all, you probably noticed that we concluded the command with a semicolon. This is required because MySQL uses the semicolon as a way to know that everything preceding that semicolon is exactly what you want to send to the MySQL server for execution. However, MySQL is not particular about, for instance, where that semicolon appears. So we could execute this command like this and achieve the same results. This behavior is in place because, particularly when writing lengthier or more complex MySQL statements, you might want to format the command using multiple lines for easier readability. Although, frankly, it isn't typical that you would use the client to type in particularly lengthy commands because there are other more convenient options for doing so, which we will talk about in later sections. However, for now, just to kind of prove that point, here is an example in which we will add show to one line, databases to another, and finally semicolon to the last to retrieve the same set of databases just fine. Secondly, the MySQL client is not particular about casing. So, for instance, we could type show in all caps followed by databases and again retrieve the same list of databases. So, first thing, you're always going to want to conclude your command with a semicolon. However, MySQL is not particular in terms of whether that semicolon immediately follows your SQL statement. And finally, casing is not an issue when it comes to the MySQL client. In fact, I generally tend to supply the MySQL specific keywords in all caps, which makes it easy to visually separate those from database names, table names. But of course, that's just a preference. You can do whatever you'd please. Incidentally, if you happened to misspell either show or databases in this example, then you've already encountered the incredibly annoying beeping sound, which indicates an error. Let's assume I misspell databases, go ahead and execute that, and you hear the annoying beeping sound in the background. You can disable this sound by passing along the no beep option when logging into the MySQL client. In fact, if I go ahead and mistype the command, there is no beeping sound in the background. Of course, you're probably going to want to disable this permanently, so later in the video, I'll show you how to permanently do so by way of modifying MySQL's configuration file. Okay, so back to this matter of databases. You can start working with a specific database by switching over to it using the use command. So for instance, if we want to switch over to the aforementioned test database, we can execute use test followed by the semicolon, and you'll see that we're told that we've switched over or changed over to that database. Further, you can use the show tables command to learn more about the tables which reside in that database. In the case of the test database, there are none, so we will see the empty set result. However, if you switch over to one of the databases containing sample data, you'll find that there is actually quite a few tables included within one of those databases. So we'll switch over to the Sakila database, which is a rather large sample database. Execute show tables, and you'll see that 23 tables are found in this database. So once you've switched over to a database, you can begin carrying out various administrative tasks associated with that database, including notably creating and managing both tables and table data. However, rather than just use the test database as a dumping ground for experimental commands, I'd like to instead guide you through a typical sequence of steps which you'll carry out in order to create a new project database. Begin by using the create database command, passing along the name of the database you'd like to create. And once done, congratulations, you've just created your first MySQL database. Once created, you're going to want to remember to switch over to that new database, presuming you want to begin using it right now, because MySQL will not automatically do this for you. So after creating the CRM database, you're going to have to switch over to it, again, using the use command. Incidentally, because typically you're going to return to a particular database over and over again, you can save yourself the extra step of having to switch over to that database after having logged in by instead providing that database name on the command line along with your other connection variables. So if I go ahead and quit and return to the MySQL connection statement, you can identify the database name simply by passing it along with the other connection variables. Again, I'm prompted for my password, and in fact, we are now logged in using that database. Creating a database isn't typically something you'll want just anybody to be able to do. Therefore, by default, this ability is only granted to the root user. However, because, as we discussed earlier in the video, the root user is so powerful, capable of literally destroying a database and even severely damaging a MySQL installation with even one ill-timed command, you should only use the root user to carry out key administrative operations, and then delegate all other tasks to another user, or more specifically, multiple users, with at least one user associated with each database. In doing so, not only will you prevent potentially catastrophic operations from being carried out by your root user, but you'll also limit the potential for damage should an attacker ever gain control of a particular user account, because that user's privileges will at best be limited to one specific database. As I mentioned earlier in the video, MySQL offers a powerful user management feature. This feature is so crucial to successful MySQL administration that later in this video I devote a complete section to the topic. At the same time, I am very keen on showing you how to do things the right way from the very beginning. And so I'm going to jump the gun a bit and show you how to create an administrative user for our newly created CRM database. This user will be able to carry out all of the typical tasks an administrator will require, including most notably creating and updating tables, and even conceivably granting privileges to other users. However, this administrator's scope of capabilities will be limited solely to the CRM database. So for instance, while they could create tables within the CRM database, they cannot create or delete tables residing in any other database found on the database server. In order to create an administrator, or any new user for that matter, you're going to first want to log in as the root user, as I've already done, and then you're going to want to execute the create user command as demonstrated here. And I'm going to call the user CRM admin. This user is going to be logging in also from localhost, and we're going to provide the CRM admin user with the password secret. Once this user is created, you are going to want to associate a certain set of privileges with that user. And you do so using the grant command. And I'm going to issue a blanket grant command by granting all privileges associated with the CRM database, and only the CRM database, to this newly created CRM user. And again, you'll do so using the grant command. Grant all privileges on CRM.*. This means on all tables associated with the CRM database to CRM admin at localhost. Go ahead and press execute. And the effect of these last two commands is that we've created a new user named CRM-admin who can log in via localhost, providing a password named secret. The second command grants all privileges associated with the CRM database to this newly created user. So with this new user created, we can go ahead and log out and log back in using the CRM admin account, identifying the fact that we want to log in to the CRM database specifically. I'm going to pass the secret password, and now we are logged in as that user, as that CRM-admin user specifically. You might recall that in the beginning of this video, I talked about the CRM database consisting logically of, among others, a customers table which would contain profile and contact information about each customer. So let's create this table, keeping the first version pretty simple. This table will consist of 5 fields, including the customer's name, email address, number of employees, state, and finally a date which identifies the date when the customer record was created. To create a table, you'll use the create table command. So create table, customers, followed by a parentheses. Now, while you can type all of what I'm about to type on the same line, I certainly suggest taking advantage of the ability to use multiple lines for reasons of convenience to execute this command. So we say create table, customers, parentheses, name, varchar, and I'll talk more about the purpose of this data type in just a moment. Email, again, varchar, which is a string, but we'll talk more about this in a moment. Employees, so this is going to identify the number of employees associated with a company, which is just a number, so we'll identify it by integer. The state, which is just going to be a 2-character string each and every time, so we will identify that by the char data type, setting its maximum value to 2. And finally, customer since date. That's the date data type. Close parentheses. We always want to include the semicolon and press enter. Once created, we can execute the show tables command to see how many tables are on our database, which in this case is just 1. And finally, you can review the table structure using the describe command. So describe customers. And as you can see, we have the customers table consisting of 5 columns. So let's talk a little bit more about these data types that were associated with each column name. The name column is defined using the varchar data type, meaning we expect it to contain text such as Acme Incorporated or XYZ Limited. The same goes for the email column, again because we expect it to contain a string, which is an email address, such as acme@example.com. The employees column is intended to contain a number identifying the current employee count, so 465, for example. Next, the state column uses a char column set to the maximum length of 2 characters because we know that all state abbreviations will use exactly 2 characters, so Ohio would be represented by OH. Therefore, as a rule of thumb, you're going to want to use varchar when the string length is variable and char when the string length is fixed. Finally, the customer underscore since column uses a date column because we are, of course, interested in recording the date in which that customer became associated with our company. So this is an interesting first version of this table. However, it actually suffers from several major problems. In light of all of these issues, let's delete or drop the table and start all over.